welcome back to what are we? The performance enhancing dudes.
Yes,
Almost
welcome back,
forgot
guys.
it there.
Welcome back, guys. Today we have a very special guest with us, the fabled, legendary, what do we call it, Asgardian himself, Dr. Zachary Riley. So we wanted to discuss with Dr. Riley some of the things that come into play when we look at like athletes advancing towards their potential, and some of maybe the limiting factors or some of the things that potentially help with that process. So I guess to start us off, Dr. Riley, what are your thoughts on, I know there's kind of this growing trend with athletes nowadays, early on in school, being kind of forced to specialize or encouraged to specialize in a specific sport or skill at a young age. What are your thoughts on that, especially kind of in our American school system?
That's a tough call. I think there's clear differences. So the Russians had it right, and the East Germans, and in the sport selection process. I do think there's merit to getting a young athlete into a sport that they're naturally talented at, based on whether it's anthropometrics and their family stock, and what their parents did, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a big distinction, because even when they would filter the athletes into those youth programs, then they would still focus on generalized fitness and gymnastics and what we would consider things that are important for youth. They still focused on those, but in a little bit more of a sport-specific way. So I think it's a misnomer to say like the German and Russian, selection systems were diverting people into one sport and they were doing that sport their entire lives, because they would divert them into, say you were diverted into weightlifting, you would practice your weightlifting movements with broomsticks, but then you would spend a ton of time doing mobility, doing basic gymnastics, doing body weight, strengthening. So it was not our American system of overusing the actual sport. So the youth today in America, they get diverted into whether it's, travel baseball, and then they spend their summers playing 70 baseball games. And then they get rotator cuff and elbow injuries and things that are associated with that. So I think there's a very important thing. If we want to establish athletes to the highest level, we do need to divert them into their generalized sport category early. It's just one man's opinion. I just think I'm right. But once they're in that sport category, they can still spend time doing generalized physical preparedness type stuff. So I think there's a big difference there between what we perceive we're doing to establish elite athletes, and then what is actually being done in the American system, which is over participating a kid in that sport. See my difference?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So I guess my next question to follow that up would then be, how do you, well, let's come back to like the Russians and Europeans and their selection process. How do you decide, or how do you determine what the best sport is for an athlete at a young age? And furthermore, I know that here we're really big on personal freedom and choice, right? And how do we convince someone to pursue what they're good at rather than what they just want to do?
And that is the tough part. I think when you look at traditional American culture, we all grow up typically, except for Davin, maybe you, because you were probably like 4 foot tall. But we all grew up playing basketball, not because I thought I had any appreciable basketball skill, but I grew up playing basketball because that was what all my friends were doing. And that's what we did when we went out in the summer, at First Light, and you started playing pickup games. Oddly enough, I did not develop any basketball skill, and did not, continue down that path. But I think it's hard. I think, you look through all the old, again, the Russian texts and some of the selection, and they based a lot on, again, your anthropometrics, what you were expected to be. They had a lot of measurables that they went through. The difference, though, is in the current society, as Devin brought up real well, you still have choice. And with choice comes, regional differences. So if you grow up in the upper Northeast, maybe you're exposed to lacrosse and all your friends are playing lacrosse. If you're a good old Southern Indiana boy, lacrosse was never on your radar, right? If you grew up in, there's other regions where soccer is really big at a youth and developmental age. We grew up in one in Columbus. So it just really depends on what I think societally, what we're around and what opportunities are there. And the tough part nowadays too is we have so many more opportunities, whether it's summer leagues, AAUs, basically pay-to-play leagues, where outside of your regular school sports, if you want to pay money, you can participate in any league you want to participate in. That's considerably different even than, say the 80s when I was growing up, where we didn't have kind of the pay-to-play leagues. You had, this season was soccer season, so you went out and did soccer. This season was baseball, you went out and did baseball. And you participated in the season that was available. But again, I think that was regional to what you grew up with and what was available in your community. Doesn't mean it's right for you, though. And that's kind of the hard part that, the overarching kind of topic I think is very interesting is I have a firm belief that everyone on this earth has a physical thing that they are most gifted at. I also firmly believe that probably 98% of the population doesn't have the exposure or enough experience to even find what that one thing is. Right? So take you in powerlifting, for instance. You're, how old are you now?
30.
30.
Just turned 30.
So just turned 30 and you really only discovered powerlifting in the last year and a half. And I've told you all along that I think this was what you were meant to do.
Right.
But it took you to 28 and a half years old to get filtered into that. I didn't really take throwing seriously in track and field until college. I didn't really participate in it that much until college because I just hadn't been exposed to it. Well, I think that was my niche. That's my thing. I can be decent at many other things in strength sports, but ultimately, if you wind it down to that one thing you are most tuned for, whether it's body type, mental, capacity, everything else, it is what you are. You're tuned to one thing. You vibrate best on one frequency. Most people just don't find what that is.
That makes sense.
So, I guess to follow that question up, I have two questions. They'll both go different directions. So, the first question being, what do we do? Let's look at like kind of someone who's maybe grown up in our American system of do whatever you feel like or whatever you're exposed to, but then they find that niche. They find their frequency, if you will. What do we do, or what is the best way to kind of start honing in on that for someone who's maybe caught onto that later on in life? What should we do to kind of make up for that lack of maybe general physical preparedness that hasn't happened, or just general specific training that hasn't happened?
Well, you hope with any scenario like that they have some background that can translate. So again, I'm going to use you as an example because it's a great case that we've talked about a lot, and that is, you spent your life bodybuilding, right? So you understand how to activate certain muscles. You understand how to perform a litany of exercises and variations. So then it is really giving you cues to what is important for our little niche of powerlifting now.
Right.
What do you need to rein in? The other thing that goes along with that is even when you find your niche, you have to have someone that is willing to put their head down and stick to that one thing. Right. And that is very tough to do on the entry level. Once you start to taste success, as you know, again, it's pretty easy and you're gung ho again. But the hard part is initially me telling you, 2 years ago that you're really built to be a power lifter, and you're like, yeah, I'll keep bodybuilding and I'll dabble in some powerlifting some. But then we talked immediately after your first official sanctioned meet, and it's immediately, oh, well, I could reach this record and this. So it changes everything. So it gave you the willingness and the drive to reach those goals in your now niche sport. So then in terms of how do we make up ground, that is a tough question to answer. And as trainers and people working with athletes, obviously you hope you reach it sooner rather than later, taking their history into account a great deal. What have they done before? And then just being smart how you program the exercises. You're not going to make up 10 years worth of work in 1 year, right? So in looking at your programming, you may hit your peak in powerlifting maybe at 34 years old. So you have to be willing to play this long game. That is, we slowly build. You're going to hit marks along the way that keep you happy and satisfied. But ultimately, we have to be realistic that the goal is not tomorrow. The goal is not a year from now. As long as you're injury free, the goal is really going to be in another 3, 4, 5 years, right? So that is tough. I think as trainers, one of the worst things you can do is jump the gun and again try to compress 10, 15 years of training and skill development into a year of programming, because it's not going to happen, and the person's likely going to end up getting hurt or worse, just quit because they're so over the monotony of it.
Right.
So
to kind of follow that up, when we look at rate of progression with a given training style or program or just general dimension of fitness, the further we go, we know that there's kind of a diminishing return on the effort you put forth. So that first year or 6 months of training and whatever it is generally when you see the most rapid change or dramatic change relative to baseline, right? But as you kind of progress along, the rate of change slows, but you still hopefully continue to progress, assuming proper programming. So let's say we take someone who's found their niche at 15 years old, right? Let's just call it powerlifting, and they've trained for it to the age of 30 versus someone who found their niche at 25 years old and trained for it to the age of 30. At what point does that rate of diminishing return kind of even back out? You know what I mean? So where would, obviously the person who's trained for it for 15 years is going to have an advantage over the person who's specifically trained for 5, but at some point those would have to be at least close, right?
I don't know that there's a time to put on it per se, but this falls into my old, and I hate saying this is kind of the impetus for why I wanted to bring this all up, is the reality of the situation is whether you started at 15 and it was your niche or you started at 25 and it was your niche. If you are a natural at this, and say Steve started at 15, right, and it's what he loves and it is what he's good at, but if you are programmed, i.e. if it is genetically embodied in you to be an elite powerlifter, you are going to close that gap quicker than anything else, right? So it does not matter necessarily the reps and the time. You're going to make the gains and close the gap very quickly. And it's very frustrating because, look, ultimately sport comes down to self-enjoyment, right? So if you're not having fun doing what you're doing and training for what you're doing, there's absolutely no point in doing it. We're not getting rich off of this. We're talking about strength sports. If we were going to be in the NFL, we would have been there already, and I'd be retired and not sitting here talking to you guys.
You say that, but we're pretty enjoyable people to talk to.
That's true.
No. But the reality is that if you are destined, and I hate using the word destined, but if you are genetically programmed to be a great or elite powerlifter, you are going to be getting there if you find it at 15 or 25. It isn't really going to matter. The only thing limiting you at that point is maybe previous injury risk, financial ability to train and do whatever you need to do, that kind of stuff. So I run into this all the time, and we've talked a lot about in Highland games, and I see athletes all the time that say, how do you do something? How do you do X? How do you do Y? What do I need to do to get there? And without sounding too cocky, the reality is you will not get there. You will improve yourself, which is great, which is what we're all after, right? Self improvement and feeling better about what we're pouring our time into. The reality is trying to say, if I put X amount of time in and I have this perfect diet and I do all this, I can reach your level. No, there's no guarantee of that, right? That's not how we're built. So it's a really hard thing to say we could close the gap at all. It's a lot easier to point out that all we can do is maximize our own ability. And if your own ability is to be a state record holder and a national competitor in powerlifting, that's one level. If your ability is to be a national record holder and international competitor, that's another level, right?
Right.
Does it mean one lifter is so supreme to the next? No, they're both good lifters. The reality is there's just differences.
Right.
There's always differences. And so you have to look at it's a multifactorial approach in terms of what actually makes that up. And it's not fair. And that's an important thing to point out, because it cracks me up when people say, well, that's just, I can get this, I can do this. I'm like, no, not necessarily. And, well, I should be able to. Oh, no, not. We're all different for a reason.
Right.
Right? And so you have to play the cards you're dealt individually. And, I also always tell people I'm like a Camaro built on a, Chevette frame, on a chassis. Like, I have a ton of horsepower, but my infrastructure's terrible. So I get hurt all the time. So if I stay healthy, I could do any training under the sun. I'm going to be a good competitor. The reality of my situation, though, is every season I get hurt.
Right.
It's going to happen. So is it more important to bank on optimizing my training, or is it more important to optimize my training to not get hurt?
Right.
So for me personally, it's to not get hurt. I have friends that I work with that they never get hurt. So their goal is to optimize training for a peak competition or something, to where everything's dialed in at that one point. I just have to be healthy for that competition.
Right.
So is it fair? No, but it's different. It's the reality of what it is. So
This is kind of on that same topic. Coming from a background of bodybuilding, I see this a lot, in especially like young competitors or people who are just coming into the sport and thinking that they're going to look like Ronnie Coleman or Steve Cook within a couple of years. I know early on I had those same delusions, right? After my first contest, I remember, thank you. I remember thinking, okay, I'm gonna eat this many calories and train this way. I'm gonna bulk up to, I think I want to bulk up to like 190, right? Which is funny because I'm staying at 205 right now, pretty comfortably, and leaner than I was then. But I wanted to bulk up to 190 and then cut back down to 176 for the next contest, because that's what Frank Zane competed at, right? And I thought if I did what he did and I trained the way he trained, then I would look like Frank Zane, right? Because it's not flawed logic initially. It's just really simple logic that doesn't take the whole equation into account.
yeah.
Right? And I think that's something that we're all susceptible to. You see this a lot in kind of the less educated or less informed crowd, simply because they don't have the skill set to kind of break that process down and understand what goes into it. And unfortunately, you see a lot of people being exploited via social media, booty building programs.
Yeah.
I see those all the time on Instagram, which brings up, what was her name? Paige Hathaway is her name? I don't know. She's a professional bikini competitor or whatever. Anyhow, the great thing about her is that she sells these booty building programs on her Instagram page or whatever. But she has butt implants, right? So again, it's just this, cycle of kind of selling something that you don't actually have to people based upon an image. And personally, it's frustrating for me, but
It's what is so tricky about that is Instagram has been great in things like providing you with goals, right? So what you said, how you envisioned Frank Zane, when you saw him in a magazine, 15, 20 years ago, it left an indelible impression, right? So you thought, this is what I want to look like when you got into competitive bodybuilding. Instagram provides us that 100 times over, right? And all the social media provides us that, which is a great incentive. It really is, and I was resistant to it for many years, but now I think there's so many people that is great motivation for, but be realistic. Right? So if I put something that's a lifting video up and I'm doing X amount of weight and I'm returning from an injury and that's your PR weight lifetime, we are different. We are different. There's nothing wrong with it. We're just different. Just like I have friends that I compete with that post things and they're doing 200 more pounds than me on something, and I look at them and go, well, in the hell world? They're different. Everything's different, But as long as you keep a healthy perspective on it and recognize it is what it is, we've lost the ability to discern anything, right? So the booty building program, it gives you a framework. Try it out. If you feel it's working, if you feel it is an effective program for you and you've done it and you've given it an honest shot and everything else, then maybe you walk away with keeping 50% of the stuff that's in that program because you felt like it was useful. And then you discard the other 50% because you're like, I didn't get much out of that, right? That's all we're doing. That's all anyone does. What we've come to, though, in this generation, and what has been a real hang-up, is people have lost the ability to take away the positives and discard the negatives, right? If everybody wants to be coached all the time, I need help. I need to know what to do here. I need to know what to do there. Listen to your own body. Yes, structure is always nice to start with, and then become a student of your own body and try to figure it out yourself. You're probably going to stumble. You're probably going to need help, but you're going to learn a lot more about yourself than just having someone coach you your entire life and not ever, be faced with that individual feedback. So, tough world we live in. So let's get back on. Do you have a question, Steve?
I always have questions.
Right.
So going back into what you were saying, where if someone's not genetically superior to someone else, they're not going to thrive in that sport. That's an oversimplified way of what we talked about for like 15 minutes. If you are that person who might not have the perfect genetics, it is realistic to say they are not going to make it to the professional level and sustain that for a long time if they even make it. If you were that person, how would you go about it? If you were like Rudy, dead set in playing that sport, what would you tell that person? What advice would you give that person?
Just be realistic. There's nothing wrong with, again, I liken it to, we do sports where you see this a lot, powerlifting. You see tons of just competitors that do it because they want to improve themselves and they like the atmosphere. Highland Games, I see it, you've seen it when you've been to Highland Games with me. You have tons of athletes that they're never going to be that good, but they love to throw. And they love spending a Saturday out with their peers and like-minded people doing things they love, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And the reality is, you still need to have goals. I still need to have goals, but they're personal goals, right? They're not, I don't base my goals on Davin's powerlifting numbers. It makes no sense. So why would you, as a competitor who maybe will not be at that top level, but you love to do it, why would you base your goals on someone else anyway? Right? It's, self-improvement is not tomorrow. It's, again, year after year after year. And as long as you still love doing it, we're all guilty of this. We've all been through different sports, different phases, different things. We want to improve. We like doing it for a period of our life. Then maybe we move on, and then you're like, oh, I need to find something else to do. Right. That stuff's fine. Again, compare yourself to yourself, though. Recreational sports is what makes America great. Sorry, Trump. It's recreational sports that makes America great. The reason for that is we have so many opportunities. How many adult softball leagues do you see? Right? How many indoor soccer leagues do you see? How many recreational hockey leagues if you're up north? How many, even down to bass fishing tournaments? You can go out and fish any day you want, but people enter tournaments, right? There's recreational things for people to do, and the reason is we like being competitive and we like being active. And that provides those outlets, but it doesn't mean you don't have a realistic view of what you're working towards. I have a realistic view. I'm 38, getting ready to be 39. Physically, I will never be at the peak that I have been. Will never be. Totally accept it. Very cool with that. There's so many other ways I can improve, though, that I can still be a better athlete. And it doesn't mean I just skip the weight room and everything now and say, well, it's lost cause now, so I should probably just pack it in. No, I just need to stave off any further decrement. But, there's still ways to improve. And the reality is I'm still going to be competing in something my whole life because I enjoy doing it. It gives me a reason to go to the gym and do things. So while you might not be purebred genetics for something, if you love doing it, do it. And train for it and commit to it. That's your passion. Go for it. So.
Well, it's cool that you say, you do it because in part it gives you a reason to go to the gym and train. That's something I tell people all the time. I don't care who they are. If they're a 60-year-old woman who's never exercised in their life, I encourage that person to look for something that they can use that exercise for. Whether it be marathon running, cycling, gardening, I don't know, whatever can kind of give you motivation, because for a lot of people, going to the gym and lifting weights just isn't fun, and it's not enough in and of itself to keep you going, but it's just like changing the oil on your car, right? Just because you don't want to do it doesn't mean you can avoid it, right? And if you do avoid it, something bad happens. So you have to kind of approach it with that sort of mindset. Exercise is necessary, doesn't matter who you are. However, when we come back to it, if it's not something that you enjoy or something you can apply it to that you enjoy, then it's not sustainable, and that goes with really anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, that is definitely, in the populations you've worked with a lot and stuff, I'm dealing with right now my mother-in-law. Love her to death. She was a gymnast when she was young. She's fairly fit and active now. She's definitely not overweight, nothing, but she just got word she has osteoporosis, osteopenia, and so one of the first things the doctor says, well, you should start some resistance training, right? Well, just simply telling her you should start resistance training, that's not enough to do it. If you turn around and say, you're going to have trouble picking up your grandkids because your bone disease will progress if you don't start resistance training. Oh, she wants to resistance train now. And so it's how you package it, it's finding someone's passion. It doesn't mean that they're going to stick to one mode and everything else. Again, kind of like what we said, you have things you're still going to be natural at, and that you still are going to enjoy more than others. I mean, just go over to NIFS on any Friday morning and watch the wannabe NBA players on the floor in the morning. They're in there playing basketball all out, and they're passionate about it, and it's important to them, and that's a goal for them.
Right.
And I'll see those same guys in the gym working on their shot, working out, strength training, and if you ask them why, it's not to look good in a bathing suit, it's to be a better basketball player on Friday mornings for their competitive rec fun.
Yeah, no, I've seen that a lot, even just with working with clients over there. A lot of times when I'm asking what their goals are, or why they have these goals, they'll say, to be better at basketball or soccer. Not that they're a professional or even on like a competitive league, but just because they play with their friends and they don't want to be the worst one out there.
Exactly.
So.
So now that we're getting to the further end of the video, I don't know, do we have any closing points that we want to extract from this fine gentleman over here?
So I don't know that I'm going to let you extract them, but I will provide them. I think the closing points I want to make, and kind of where this discussion, it went all over the place, but that's what's fun about discussion. But the important point, I think, is that, you know, we're kind of each, yes, we are each built, designed, mentally constructed for a given sport or athletic type of event. The reality is we don't find that oftentimes. We might be searching for it forever. And also the reality is you have to have realistic expectations about how you compare yourself to others when you find it. No amount of drugs, no amount of dedicated nutrition, no amount of hiring the best trainer is going to overcome, you know, I'm not going to be the rugby player Steve is. You know, it's just reality. Well, I might be, but
Yeah.
we don't know. But I'm not going to be the 181-pound class powerlifter that Davin is, because I won't ever be 181 pounds again. But we have to be realistic in what our goals and expectations are. I'm on the fence. I don't think there's anything terrible about our idea of specialization in that kind of directing people to what we think they might be good at young. But it doesn't mean we have to make them overly competitive at the young age. You know, what the Soviets and everyone did right was they funneled people, but then they still did the basic gymnastics, body weight movements, running, swimming, jumping. You know, it was still basic, but then they gradually started imparting specific training in. So I think there's things we have to be smart about, especially I have a 10-year-old daughter. It's the things that I have to approach right now. What is too much? What is not enough? You know, and it's different from when I was a kid, because she lacks the general exercise foundation that I had because we were always outside playing. So there's things to consider, I think, though, that having discussions, especially among professionals in the strength conditioning field, these are very important for how you approach working with clients and athletes in general.
So I guess in summary, the big things that we kind of covered today is genetic potential and how that factors into athletic ability from a young age going forward. The importance of training, I guess, training in a way that prepares you for whatever sport that is that you are going towards, rather than just kind of training all over the place or
haphazard.
Haphazard training. And let's see, what else did we cover?
What made America great again? It's all the sports we have the opportunity to play at
Recreational
different levels.
sports.
Yes. So I would like to back up and say what made America great in the first place and still is making America great. Not again, because we never stopped with the recreational sports I'm aware of. So Trump's entire foundation was kind of based on a misunderstanding. But so yeah,
This is not a political.
It's not. I'm just
Video.
getting into the fact. So the big thing is, do what you love, but be realistic, right? Because if you're not going to be a world-class powerlifter, bodybuilder, hockey player, rugby player, thrower, you're not going to be one. And you'll probably realize that as you get into the sport. You'll either progress very rapidly and it'll come naturally, or you'll have a lot of hardship and trial along the way. But the stick-to-itiveness, the grit is part of that process. It's part of the struggle, and being able to kind of push through those times when you're not seeing the progress you want to see, or being able to push those times when it's not fun anymore, is what's really going to kind of separate you and make you great at the sport that you're pursuing. And again, that's great relative to you. So I think that's ultimately all I want to say. So,
Thank you,
for
performance
coming over
enhancing
here.
dudes.
right?
The best dudes.
Yes, all the best dudes in this
Best
room.
dudes. No, in the world, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, we're all three of them are here in this room.
Fact.
Yes,
Absolute fact.
yes. You have to flash your other bicep.
Oh, yeah. Real.